Hey, David, thank you for coming in. You have an outstanding, marvelous career, contribution, and impact, and continuing so just outsized in all the things you do, and so grateful you're here to share insights with our audience.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Also a big fan of everything that you do, and always our conversations are so deeply engaging and tend to cover so many parallels and areas between, the world and, the frontiers of consciousness, AI, everything. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation.
So, David, the first question is about, what were the two or three inflection points in your life that made you who you are today? And it could have been when you're 3 or 5 years old. It could have been later in life, inside the family, outside the family, mentors. It could be something in school, maybe jobs you've had. What were those things that shaped you to who you are today?
Wow, two or three inflection points. I've gathered two. And then say okay, I'll start with to be honest, I find a lot of how you turn how you become who you are depends a lot on how you approach trauma, essentially. Whether you're able to transmute that trauma into strength and into something that is beneficial for your purpose, for your life, and moving forward, or whether it causes you to drown. So the first inflection point, I would say, was seeing. I was born into quite a wealthy family, and but at the age of 4, when my grandfather died, everything went away. And seeing the shock that caused to my mother, the divorce, and then going from living in buildings of our own hotels in Kensington, where we hosted the royalty of the Middle East, to moving to a hostel where there were 10 rooms and a single bathroom, watching my mother cry to sleep each night, and not really understanding what was going on. It took me about 40 years to really understand that. I'm 47 now. And to process and take the strength from that. I have my cat just coming here just for a second, sorry. Uh, I had to go back to that point many, many times until I visited that point, both as an adult and came back and comforted myself as a child, comforted my mother, allowed them to hear what they needed to hear in order for them to grow, and that allowed me to move on. The second one, I would say, was much later in my life. It was in 2010. It was after my divorce, and I went out to the desert in Sinai in Egypt following a dream and sat for a 40-day water fast. And during that time, I had an experience which fundamentally and forever changed my life. I'll share on that another time in more details. And then I say the third was the whole process that I've been through in Africa. Really choosing a path where you want to see justice in the lives of the most vulnerable, where you want to see their lives bettered, was the hardest thing I've ever faced. And if I'd known how hard the journey would be, I wouldn't have started it. But it has fundamentally humbled me. It has fundamentally given me the pillars of wisdom with which I could become a man and essentially be proud of what I'm doing in life.
So that's really, it's, I can see those pivotal moments where, as you indicated, you had a lot of means when you were young, and then you go through this transformational process of challenge, economic challenge as well, and that would shape you, right? And a complete upheaval in your life, and then later you have another challenge in your life, and then you do this fast, and that would, I guess, ground you spiritually in many ways, or you feel some kind of spiritual connection at the end of that journey. I'm kind of guessing there, and then of course all of the things that you're doing in Africa and how you're so embedded and understanding both the opportunities but the challenges there in Africa as well. those are really big points in your life. And as you indicated, you're 47, but it took 40 years to get some of this recovery happening, right? And that's
Yeah, I mean, it took me a while to think of which ones because many people know me as like a phoenix, essentially. I've faced so many deaths in my life, pretty much on a biannual basis. I'll have to face something, things burning to the ground or everything disappearing or massive betrayals but what are the real inflection points? What are the ones that truly shape you and give you a certain reverence for life? And enable you to understand that the journey is worthwhile. I mean, it took me a long time to actually make sense of life. And when you go back to those early points in life, you're retrieving a split off part of yourself because fundamentally your personality, your character forms as a defense mechanism in many ways to integrate yourself, protect you from the world, and allow you to function and thrive. And so those early traumas, there's aspects of your being that kind of get pulled back. And then there's another character that comes forward. It's like the best thing you could construct at the time. And with me, it was rage, to be honest. I didn't know how to deal with what was happening. And so rage came in. And rage fundamentally is not, it's not, it's not the natural inclination of a loving child, And what brought me peace was really being able to hold that child and tell him and prepare him and say, this is what's coming. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy, my son, but I'm there. And there just wasn't anyone there. I was sent off to boarding school like when I was like 5, and everyone else was like 8. And it's like, what the hell? What's going on? And I find that happiness is relative to expectation. So when I've been in Africa, you find kids where Joseph Kony came in and he got the child to kill its own parents, and it's so horrifically traumatizing. Um, but everyone kind of, deals with their level of happiness based on their expectation of what they thought their life was going to be. And that's another thing that kind of gave me a lot of peace along the journey.
so you're very young. Let's look at your kind of school journey. When you were very young and you're in a boarding school, I guess there's a set curriculum, but what are the things that you were really interested in? Like,
You know, I was fundamentally naturally gifted at mathematics and sport I was for maths to me, there'd be a 3-hour exam. I'd do it in 45 minutes and I'd just sit there like not knowing what to do. And sports, I had to win everything that I could, but I was running, I was running from life in many ways. I was running from my pain and I was just really, but what I was interested in wasn't really cultivated as a child. And I think that's fundamentally the problem with the education system. I deal with people at the frontiers of education, and you get this education until the age of 18, which doesn't equip you for life at all. I'm interested in relationships, in friendships. I'm really interested in creativity. I'm interested in the soul and the spirit. None of that was watered. As a child, it was all, the traditional curriculum, memorize, memorize, memorize. And so it takes you a long time to come to know who you are and what you want. No.
so you have this gift and affinity for sports and mathematics, but as you indicated, it's a kind of a running away, I guess, especially the sports part, right? Because there's a kind of this physical endurance that's part of that. What led you to the kinds of studies you took, let's say, post high school?
Um, so again, much of my life was a reaction to trying to solve problems I'd experienced in my childhood. I wanted to save my mother from the economic disaster of her life. She was an entrepreneur and She was getting cheated in everything and everywhere. And it was just horrendous for me watching it. And so I took on economics. I interviewed at like Cambridge and so forth on
Yeah.
maths. And I didn't know, essentially, I only applied for King's College. I didn't know what I was doing at all. And then, so eventually I went to Warwick, did economics, which was, to be honest, the most boring degree you could. It was just, marginal utility theory and Keynesian economics. And I was like, what the hell is going on? Because when I came to understand the economic system, I was like, wow, this is a giant con. What's happening here is fundamentally layered with very clever words like quantitative easing and all these kind of things. So the average person, the bricklayer, has no idea they're being ripped off, that things are not being done in the right way. So what led me to economics and then to investment banking was I wanted to provide. I really wanted to provide for my family. I really wanted to be a success, and I didn't really know what being a success meant. And I was just driven, very driven. Yeah.
So, driven from a financial standpoint and having some sort of financial success, I guess, right? Because investment banking is very finance kind of is the root of it, right? So,
It was quite, my next school had been a religious Jewish school. It didn't really connect me to God. We spent 2.5 hours a day just kind of reading prayers, and not knowing what we were reading. The faster you could read them, the better. So you read like 20 pages in like 5 minutes, which is ridiculous. And so I didn't have a connection to what I would call, the spirit or existence or the fundamental nature of being. And so you want to improve yourself, and the traditional methodology that most top graduates is go into investment banking, make money, get a beautiful woman. What did you see on TV, basically? What is success, And your measure what success and what wealth is changes as you grow older, or as you start to ask deeper questions.
so you have this journey and you end up in investment banking and finances. And what was that journey like? You had different awakenings, I guess, that as you're doing this, and what led you to then move onwards or forward beyond investment banking?
Yeah. So investment banking, I came out of, I graduated in 98. And I had at the time lined up a role in ABN AMRO for trading risk, which was, great for me. I love statistics and everything else. But the time was the fall of long-term capital management. You had the Russian default, and pretty much all the graduates at the time got laid off. As we were going in, I was like, welcome, goodbye. And I was like, oh my God. And so the next 6 months, I went from, wanting to be on the graduate sales trading program, all those kind of things, to just trying to get a job, and I didn't have any money. And I ended up working as a sales and marketing person for a publishing company for probably one of the worst books you can imagine. I really had to do some graft, some jobs that I really didn't enjoy. Licking envelopes at the BBC, basically, doing things. And then I got a foot in the door at Salomon Brothers. That got me a job instead of, my friend was in emerging markets, who had always been like, we were like 2 days apart, our birthdays. I should have been on that program. He was a trader. I was an analyst. And I was extraordinarily bored. I was just, at the same time as doing that, I started making movies. I remember there was one at the time called Sacrifice Kings. I started becoming an entrepreneur. I just wanted to break through. And my managing director at the time Oh my God, we hated him. He would circle around the desks every 20 minutes and he would look over your shoulder to see if you were working. And it was just, you were like on edge. You were on edge. And it really wasn't a nice environment. And so I left after, I think it was 4 or 5 years. I can't remember now, around 2003, 2004. And I just wanted something with substance, with meaning. And of course, the obvious choice was to go to Indonesia and start an orphanage, help an orphanage. So I was like, just give me something with meaning. It's just like, get me out of here. Yeah.
But you indicated though you were interested in movies as well, though, and then you left that, right?
Yeah, so in trying to help the I'm just going to turn this off, this light. Uh in trying to help the orphanages, this is my first lessons in overcoming naivety, really. I was like, okay, great, but this is going to the movies, by the way, in a second. We ended up becoming Charity of the Year very quickly for a group called the North London Gas Alliance, which was Skanska, McNicholas, National Grid. And I was like, great, you guys have billions in revenues. You're at least gonna, give us like 1 million to help these orphans. So I started making all these plans. How we're gonna help the orphans, what we do, everything else. They threw a big event at the end of the year, and the whole amount they gave us for the whole year was 4.5 grand. And I was like, what on earth is going on? And this time, this was an inflection point, actually. When I was in Indonesia, I'll get to the movies. On the way to the orphanage, the car stopped, and I'll never forget this. The car stopped, and out of the banks of the river and the forest came hundreds and hundreds of disabled children. And when I say disabled, they were grotesquely deformed. And I mean, so much so that if you saw them, it would be hard for you to look. It was really bad. And we were stuck in traffic for about 40 minutes. And I was just dying, just looking at them. And I later found out that this was because the mining company was dumping heavy metals into the water supply with no concern for the people. So anyway, the movie part came. I went to live in LA, in Thousand Oaks and around the Calabasas and these kinds of areas. And for 2 years, we started a independent movie company. We're going to put all the proceeds to helping these orphans. I put all my money in. We made an independent film which released in the Far East, went to #1. We got 0 of the revenues. And by the end of it, I was, broke and divorced. And I was the one that needed charity at that point. I couldn't make sense of the world at that point. That was around 2010. And that's what set me off on my fast. I was like, I just went out and I said, I'll get to that part anyway, the second. So I know you're following a chronology.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting. You have this trauma, right? Challenges throughout, but you do have talent as well, right? So you're mining your abilities, and you go to great schools, and you end up graduating, and you end up in one part of the financial industry, but that sort of does a pivot, and you have to pivot in investment banking, and you end up with Sullivan Brothers and Citigroup at fixed income. And but that wasn't fulfilling. I feel that wasn't fulfilling for you. It was draining, like you mentioned the gentleman circling your desk and things like that, right?
Yeah.
And yet you thought, well, you know what? I'm going to build an orphanage in Indonesia, and you end up on that journey of the orphanage, and you're courting people because you're going to do this big event, and then it ends up big disappointment. It wasn't the way you thought it would go. But during this process in your journey, you come across these orphans or people who have been hurt and it was a shock for you, probably a visceral, spiritual shock. And that was one of the catalysts for you to say, your divorce happened and then your 40-day water fast in Egypt and this divine intervention that happens, right? And restoring your spirit and
Mhm.
I guess being one with the universe in some sense. And it's sort of your inner voice, but maybe kind of the spiritual harmony happening in this 40-day water fast. Can you talk about that
Yeah, thank you.
process?
Two parts that spoke to me there. One is the visceral shock, and then two is finally getting some answers. So the visceral shock was when we finally arrived. So the orphanage was built, but I wanted to build and expand and develop and help because there were many, many more kids who lived under bridges and everything. And I went in there, and it was my first visit to an orphanage, and there were 72 children in there. And there was one little girl, I'll never forget her. She had this kind of short bobbed hair. She was maybe about 4 years old. And she came and sat on my lap and gave me a big hug, like probably the most loving hug. Like I just, the pure love came off this child. She wanted to give love. She wanted to give love. And I thought I would be the one giving them love and they would be needy and destitute. And I had the wrong concept. And uh, I walked outside the orphanage and I fell to my knees and I just wept and I just cried. And I just said, I've just spent so much, coming here and doing this and doing that. And I just, it just tore me. It tore me. Um, and at the time, I was on quite a Christian path, actually. It was the only pure religion in the eyes of God is caring for orphans and widows. Um, but, I could understand there why, because they were so helpless and so vulnerable to what was going to happen after they left the orphanage. Many of these kids end up, prostituted or trafficked or God knows. They didn't have opportunity. So anyway, by the time I'd failed, after I would say what was almost 6 years of work, and I mean dedicated work. Sometimes I'd work through the night. The days were just a blur of just constantly working and working. I was training in the martial arts of Indonesia. I was honing my spirit. I was meditating several hours a day, as well as doing all my work just to keep the balance. And so when the divorce happened, and there was quite a lot of it was a very painful way that it happened. I won't get into it now. Let's leave that. But I had a dream, and the dream was to go to Egypt, and I went out and I said, either give me answers or let me die. I'm going to fast until I have some answers, or I'm going to die. I'm not interested anymore. This world doesn't make sense to me, and I need to understand what's going on. And it was through that process that I had an experience, a physical experience, where I encountered the being that visited me at the time when I was visiting the temple of the goddess Hathor in Sinai, near the turquoise mines. There was a temple of hers hidden there, very sacred temple that was left in ruins. And my intention was so strong that it happened on the second day of the fast, where I was seated there. There was no one in that temple, and no one would come for days. And I stayed there for days. And it's hard for me to share this in here, but I will. there's really no way to describe what it felt like feeling someone walk into that cave, into that temple where you could hear them, you could feel them, but you couldn't see them. And as they came as she came closer and closer and closer, um, she reached out and touched my forehead, and I cried. I just wept because at that moment I said, "Oh my God, I have a soul." And then fundamentally my whole value system, my whole structure, my whole understanding of life went from belief to certainty in that area. And that became an anchor for me. And from that anchoring point, I was like, well, I'm not awakened and enlightened, but how can I be of benefit to other people? How can I help? What can I do? Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a defining moment for you and your spirit and your inner core, and then it's shaping and guiding the things you do today and into the future. So, how did that manifest itself in terms of the actions you would then take right after that?
So I completed the fast. I went to I only had I had a one-way ticket with 300 British pounds in my pocket. Somehow I needed to find accommodation, water, thankfully not food for those times. And people turned up. I knew no one, but these wisdom keepers of the land, the Al Hakim family, Awyan Al Hakim's family, turned up and they arranged a place for me, and I could see the pyramids from my room. And I completed the fast. I looked like about 50 kilos by the end of it. Just this big smile on a stick. I was just very happy. And I went home. I took the bus journey back through Israel and back to London. I couldn't afford a ticket, so I had to find a way back. And it wasn't until about a year and a half later. So I started to write after that. I wrote books and everything else, and I sat and I waited and I went and I was writing. Um, and then I met a woman who I fell in love with, who was an indigenous oracle. And really, from that point, was when it was like, okay, go to Africa, go and help in sub-Saharan Africa. And I'm like, what on earth are you talking about? I've never set foot in sub-Saharan Africa. I don't know anything. I'm broke. I have 70 pounds a week coming into my account. I know nothing about development in Africa. What are you talking about? I'm not, you're crazy. She says, no, your path is there. Your grandfather was the last president of the Jewish community in Sudan. You have a good name there. There is a blessing there waiting for you to go. And within 6 months, I was advising heads of state. I had on my team former heads of intelligence and heads of big land development companies. We were working on the largest project in South Sudan, which was a $3 billion pipeline, oil pipeline. I had no interest in oil, by the way. I only got involved because they said they could put half of the money towards agriculture and towards helping people. So I was like, okay. And that started my path then in Africa around the independence of South Sudan.
And then you then get, you've been embedded in projects within Africa. Can you describe some of those projects and what you're currently working on?
Thank you. So we're working on the development of the region of Karamoja in North Uganda. Karamoja is essentially the place where the earliest remains of hominids were discovered. So Leakey discovered Lucy in Ethiopia, but there's much, much older remnants of hominids that were discovered there. So our earliest ancestors. And this tribe went through the worst famine in recorded history. But despite them having 57 cents a day as their income, which is one of the lowest in the world. Probably North Korea is lower, I don't know. But they were sitting on just a vast quantum of natural resources that per capita made them wealthier than Norway or the UAE. And so that was a mathematical and economic justice problem for me, where I was like, wow, if we can help them access their wealth to develop their economy, they would never have to go through what they've been through again. And so some of the projects we're working on, we just funded last year 250,000 women farmers, smallholder women farmers in Ghana, who produce shea, like soaps and detergents for sale in the US market. Whole Foods, Thrive, and national retailers. They came to us at a time where they really needed support, otherwise they were going to die. And we had to make a decision whether to help them with half our operating capital, which would risk our company, or just let them die, and so I spoke to my team and I said, look, 250,000 women farmers, we're like several people on this team. If we die, if our organization dies because of this investment, it's a risk I'm willing to take. Oh boy, did that split the company. Oh boy, because you have single mothers there, and after us, Whole Foods invested, and a CEO or former CEO also. And they've shipped their orders. They're making a few million in revenues now. They're expected to make 20 million in revenues the year after. They're still not out of the woods. I have to say it's very hard for successful African companies to get funding. Very hard. Very, very hard. And that needs to change, because they have tens of millions in terms of potential purchase orders, but they can't get the money to harvest the product to ship for the purchase orders, even though they've got a proven track record. So anyways, that's one of the projects.
And then what are some of the other ones that you want to spotlight?
So the one of the other ones is the tokenization of real world assets. So it's great that you have the gold. It's great that you have these rare earth metals and all the things, but traditionally the mining companies are going to come in and they're going to tear apart your lands and potentially leave yourselves in a much worse situation and only give you very little royalties. So what's changing now is that almost all assets, stocks, bonds, in about a decade from now will end up being tokenized. And we're dealing with groups now who are at the front line of a new emerging asset class where tokenization is backed by real world assets, real world outcomes, and real dividends. And so what we're doing is putting the wealth and the voice back into the people's hands. So they themselves are in control of their own wealth, and up to 90% of that wealth is reinvested locally.
And so, you have BES Earth. Can you describe that?
Yes. So BES is born of a vision for the future of civilization. But really, when we ask ourselves, what is the future of civilization, rather than going to, and we're offered many of these great kingdoms to work with that want to become like Dubai, I said, well, if it's not a revolution, it's not a revolution unless it works for the poorest of people. So with BES, we have a 25-year vision, which goes from the basics of economic development, people having a voice and a share in their economies, to what we call the 12 pillars of civilization, where you're looking at how the things that you would most fundamentally want for your family, can end up being massively reduced in cost or even being provided free through the economic structure, the economic system that's being built. All the way to 25 years from now, we're looking at the evolution of consciousness, the neurosingularity, how people will be living in kind of nucleus villages, awakened societies. But at its bedrock, we're starting by solving and alleviating poverty.
And how can people get involved to support your work?
Thank you. Well, we're very blessed at the moment after many years of strife. We have some incredible investment partners now, and individuals who have come on board and are coming on board to fund these developments. So that's incredibly exciting. What will in the next phase in the coming year, as we tokenize the BES currency, that will enable people to participate at any level. It will allow them, if they want to participate in helping 1 ear of corn, one house, one farmer, but they will have the multiplier effects and the benefits of the natural wealth of that economic system. So wherever you're funding into, whether it's health or education, so forth, you will be getting the massive multiplier effects of the wealth that we're unlocking for those people and those investors. So it's something for people to keep their eyes on and to watch, and they'll know exactly when it's an exciting time to participate.
You know, there's regulatory forces too. So how do you manage the regulatory side, and then
Yeah. So the good thing is I'm not the expert in these areas. So like if you want to have neurosurgery, you don't go buy a scalpel and a mirror and start kind of hacking away. The great thing is we went to two of the world's best people. I won't necessarily mention their names just here, but one of them was at the forefront of one of the biggest shifts that happened globally in terms of tokenization. Incredible individual, real genius. And another is a kingdom within the Middle East that I was having this conversation yesterday because they're regulated by the central bank, and that central bank is truly considered to be the highest level of regulation. So when you have that approval, then the rest of the GCC follows. But since we're signing those agreements at the moment, I will be able to share them with you. It's literally happening just now. Yeah.
So here you are, you've gone through various traumas through your life, challenges, and it's you were spiritually exhausted when you were younger, and then you have these various epiphanies that have occurred through these traumas and challenges, and it's opened up your life, your spirit into this harmony that you feel now and that you're able to execute on. So you must feel glorious in terms of how you feel in your heart, in your spirit, but also with the work that you're doing. Can you project then what you would see as the ideal reality by 2050?
Wow, thank you. The ideal reality comes after actually quite a period of upheaval that we're expecting in the coming years, whether from climate or war or AI, other aspects. We have, I don't know if the right word, a concatenation of existential crises heading towards humanity. But they're also going to push certain aspects of humanity to accelerate and innovate and understand fundamentally who we are and what is our reason for being. And the future that we see for humanity is one that fundamentally entwines quantum science, with advances in AI, with the deepest wisdom we have in terms of the fundamental fabric of reality and the soul. So that means aspects like we call it quantum synaptic neurogenesis. How do you map enlightenment? How do you enable people, rather than taking a 40-year journey in the desert, to have the ability to fully immerse themselves in experiences that bring online jungles of neurons that enable them to bridge the fundamental understanding of the nature of their being, of their soul. So that future, in many ways, is one where enlightenment is not reserved for the privileged few, or for the few who are courageous enough to sacrifice their whole life to go aside and follow it. But it's one that's understood on a scientific level. It's one that's fundamentally supported by AGI, down to the neuron, down to the synapse, down to every nuance that makes us human, mapped against trillions of other data points, that enables you to walk forward and live a beautiful life. And how those individuals then start to come together in what we would call nucleus villages, essentially, rather than trying to fight with tens of millions of other people within cities for scarce resources. What is truly a harmonious, joyful, balanced, creative, wondrous life? And how do the fundamental aspects, the costs of living, how are they driven to zero? Because where we're advancing in terms of the good pole of AI, I'm not going to talk about when it's used for evil and destructive forces, but its potential is to liberate us from the shackles of unnecessary labor. And what does that mean to be a human at that point, where you only need to work? And this doesn't mean that all of humanity will get to that point. It will start in clusters, in groups. But what does it mean when your life is free to achieve your highest potential? What happens then? You know, I think what's really nice is that brilliant minds such as yours, and I sit here humbled. So you say it's glorious. It's glorious at moments, but it's always very humbling. Always my feet and sometimes my hands close to the ground, ever knowing that it is a tribe. It is a group of many individuals who've come together for times like these, not from a religious perspective, but to say, what is humanity's true potential, and almost like, how do we help them get there?
You know, you mentioned earlier, I would say your life partner, currently indigenous, oracle, a seer. How does she see, or how does your partner see this future?
Okay, well, God bless. I am in my I've been married 3 times. uh, got the wonderful indigenous seer. We were together from 2012 until 2000 and I would say about 2018, and we continued to work together until this day. So this part I have to hold confidential in many ways, because this journey has probably taken a greater toll on her than anyone else that I know within this. Her journey was much harder than mine. Growing up in Tunisia, being a Jewish girl in what was quite a fundamentalist school. She doesn't like to speak about it so much, and then having to go from living next door to the prime minister to being in the slums of Melassine in Tunisia. So she had this very strange childhood, and that trauma, as she sees two realities. One was the one that we always hoped that things would become, and two is the one seen through the filter of the trauma, where humanity doesn't make it, where if they don't pull themselves together, these fires that you see in LA, these wars that are raging in the Middle East, that really will escalate. I believe it scares her, and she has at times been the great inspiration that brought us back to Karamoja, to Uganda, to do as many things there. But yeah, sorry, that one's very close to my, it's a bit hard to speak about right now. Yep.
You provided such a deep reflection of where it is today and the interplay between all life and essence and spirits that are on this planet and where it's going and how it's converging with science and different elements of science. And this is the last question, what recommendations would you then leave for people? Because you've experienced so much and you see so much, right? And or questions do you want to leave the audience? So it could be a combination of the two, recommendations and or questions as well.
We need to choose questions, then what is true wealth? How do I wish to be remembered? And if you took as a fundamental constant, as a real given, that you have a soul, that you have an eternal aspect of your being, how would you relate to your fellow man?
Could we expand that?
Yeah.
Not just to your fellow man, but to all life, or you want to
all life, yes,
yeah.
to all life. All that, and actually that's a very important expansion because it's very much the fabric of existence. We are fundamentally entwined with it, entangled. We do not understand the fundamental mystery of life. People can explain quantum entanglement, for instance, but they don't understand the mystery behind it. Space-time collapsing to a single point. You're like, come on, you've explained. It's like explaining the Big Bang. Just like, okay, an explanation. But yeah, so all life, it's a certain reverence and a certain understanding that the journey is worthwhile. And most of all, to those people who really struggle, who really find this journey difficult. And it is a difficult journey. And if anyone tells you otherwise, they're generally selling you something. So it's really, really to come to a place where you have courage, you have belief in yourself, you value and understand that this journey is worthwhile, and that it doesn't need to be a path of suffering to wisdom. That's one of the hardest lessons I had to learn. There's also a joyful path to wisdom. It seems to actually, it flows freely. Wisdom. I always thought you had to suffer terribly to gain wisdom. That's not true. So try to choose a more joyful path in life if you can, and really follow paths that are going to invigorate your life with an energy which makes you happy. I know it sounds simple, and do as much as you can when you can without sacrificing yourself completely to help other people.
Well, those are definitely words to reflect on and to guide and and to ask soulful questions of oneself on a continuing basis, and to share those soulful questions with others to incentivize or to shared experiences and servant leadership can ultimately result in much better going forward. So, David, you did so much today. You shared so much, and I thank you for coming in and engaging in our delightful dialogue today. So,
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you for your time, Stephen. It's always a delight to see you. And I hope we get to have more of these dialogues as you see evolving and ideas, as everything began with ideas, but it's now crystallizing into realities and lives changed. So looking forward to speaking again soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.